we're going to start with Dale Mcphee, who I'm very appreciative is taking time to come on because he's the chief of police in Edmonton, so he's a busy guy. And again, like the session that we just finished, the issues of community safety have been raised repeatedly. The downtowns, because of the people leaving the downtowns and not in their offices, it's been harder and harder, I think, to navigate some of the community safety issues that we're seeing in downtowns in Canada and the mental health issues that are associated with that. So as I said, your domain has been touched on many, many times. And I know you're talking to your colleagues across the country about not only the impact of COVID, but also the impact of the racial reckoning that we're experiencing and have been experiencing since the George Floyd murder and all the other events that preceded it. And as we every day have a new kind of a exposure on reconciliation and more discoveries of burial grounds and things, it's a very volatile time, I would say, for people, and particularly for people that are on who are experiencing frustration with the systems, right? And aren't being well served by whichever system they are part of or in fact aren't part of. So can you give us a sense from your perspective what you see the challenges to be for police forces and for going forward partnerships? Because I think that's another piece of it that we're going to talk about after we're done with you here is one of the themes that's come out again and again and again: partnerships, collaboration.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Marie, and I realize just what you said. I'm standing between this and libations.
Well, no, it's you and me, kid. It's not just you. We've got others, but we appreciate that people have stayed on as long as they have, and we want to make sure that we touch on the key things that people have raised. And your topic is a critically important one.
Yeah, and I think you've just hit on it. It boils down to two ingredients if we're going to make some success in this environment. It's leadership and partnership, and it's the right partnerships. And as you said, COVID, what's happened south of the border that spilled into Canada, and the addictions issue that's seemed to be on the front burner, and you've got a combination of people struggling, and you got a combination of people that are exploiting people struggling. It's playing out in all our downtowns, as I just caught last part of that panel. And the reality is it's going to take a different model. It's going to take a new approach to this. And that approach is innovation, it's data, it's information sharing. For us as a police service, we're investing into social workers and putting them in police car, or not even a police car. They're marked differently to take people out of the justice system. But at the same time, there's a whole bunch of individuals. I was on a call yesterday with all of our shelter operators, and the gangs are exploiting that, because if you think about that's a mobile population that's vulnerable and is easy to exploit. So it's the perfect storm, but it's the perfect opportunity for change. And one of the biggest missing pieces in Canada, in my opinion, is we need some serious investment in the addiction space. We need to absolutely tackle the addiction space. But when you actually look at infrastructure, as talked about downtown, this is about putting the right people in a room. Forget about your titles, use your appropriate authorities. And there needs to be some accountability in this space, but accountability isn't always punitive. Accountability sometimes for those struggling is getting them in connections with services that can actually help get them back on the right track. So I think that's something that, certainly, as you're aware, I've been all over the world on, and I think it's a real opportunity for us. And that's what we're doubling down on right now. But what we have to guard against, as you're also aware, is people thinking this is an easy policy decision and we can just run off and say this is going to change by a stroke of the pen. That's never worked. Moving money around has never worked. This is about getting the right people in the right room and say, what are we going to do differently? Not what are we going to do more of the same of, what are we going to do differently?
Yeah, what is it, that definition? The definition of insanity is doing what you've always done and you get what you've always got. I hear you saying it's not just about money, but it probably is about money. But it's got to start with people being in some kind of a collaborative space to try to troubleshoot and problem solve together, right?
Yeah, and I mean, we did a money in the system project in Edmonton and looked at the amount of money in the social safety net in Edmonton. It was 7.5 billion a year. So maybe it's really, how do we allocate that in a team approach to get better outcomes, and how are we going to measure those outcomes? I think that's a space that Canada's the hill's there to take, and we got to take it. And really, when you think of downtowns in particular, and you think of what's struggling, is It can't be to help a person at the expense of your business community or at the expense of another community. It's all of these things need to be added to the sentence, because we've got businesses that are walking out because it's not the perception and some of the things. We're coming off at Edmonton 3 of our best crime stat years for success compared to other police services in the country than we've ever had. But what we really have is a hotspot that's showing up in our downtown and our LRT. And if we see how transit's actually being reduced, COVID's impacting it. So those things are going to need some investment, but they're also going to need to deal with the safety component, or people aren't going to show up in those environments. And that's a problem.
Well, and you just mentioned crime stat. I mean, this notion that we have to have data that pinpoints for us where is the exact problem, and then how do you address that? That's true whether you're looking at homelessness, whether you're looking at other aspects of systems that are dysfunctional. You've got to have the data to be able, because sometimes it's not the whole thing; it's a particular situation. So I appreciate what you're suggesting there. As we go forward, Dale, and you say we've got an opportunity here to rethink in a dramatic way, and we had at the beginning of today, we had the chair of the Big City Mayor's Caucus, Mike Savage, the mayor of Halifax, with Carol Saab from the FCM, and they were indicating that they are having a meeting with Minister Bennett to talk about mental health and to talk about a different kind of investment strategy. And so I'm going to invite my colleagues to join me here. And Dale, you feel free to stay as long as you can, but I know that you need to go and slay a few dragons. So if you have to drop off, we understand. But I want my colleagues to come on, because I think there have been themes that we've been identifying over the last 2 days that you might want to comment on as well, Dale, but that I'm just going to offer a few of them and then get their feedback on it. One is this: we were hearing consistently from different sectors that we need collaborative investment strategies and policy leadership, not just one intervention or one kind of investment, but we actually need mental health to talk to transit, to talk to housing, to talk to economic development. And we're not set up well to do that. I'm interested at the granular level. Chief, you're the chief of police, so I bet you get a return phone call no matter who you call. And it's interesting to imagine, is this a role that the police could play? I don't know, to be the broker.
Doing. That's what we're doing, is trying to be the broker on that, as you're aware. And when I want to be very careful is because we're not elected, we're appointed, and certainly we act local. We can't own it, but we need to broker it, and we need to get underneath the community as an extension of the community rather than on top of the community. So that's a role that we think we have to play, a pivotal role to bring this together. But we absolutely need to bring the attention and deal with the addictions crisis we have going on. And it's not simply just giving more drugs, because that isn't going to work either. It's going to be a continuum of services where people can get the services they need at the time of crisis to actually do an appropriate intervention, which is going to keep them out of the criminal justice system, but it's also going to keep them out of the emergency rooms in the hospitals. We have the ability to do this, but we got to think differently.
It's interesting because in the previous couple of sessions ago, we had a judge with us who's running what I would call a community court system in Victoria. And it's exactly that. It's an integrated service model, so that the person that is who's causing who's posing the risk to themselves and risk to the community, that there are handy supports very much available. It's not lost in the labyrinthian, go to this department, go to that department. It's very place-based. And Alex, I don't know if you've had a chance to think about these things in between all the responsibilities that you carry, because I know you've been teaching for the last 2 days. But one of the things that I'm struck by is how challenged we are by trying to do things horizontally in Canada. And yet, you're just hearing a chief of police say, I'm finding a way to do it locally. We heard a lot of examples from Calgary. Calgary, I think, wins the prize. I don't know whether the chat will agree with me. There was a lot of go Calgary, go. They seem to be finding a way to combine a kind of city-based collective strategy. And I think a lot of it's been driven by the fact that their downtown's been desperate for 8 years. Alex, do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the governance infrastructure, or should we just make it up?
It's getting at so many of the comments that have been made so far about how much we reimagine, how much do we stick with the old ways that we've been doing things.
What do you think?
I think we can reimagine. I don't see why we can't. We've done it forever, right? We've seen that something doesn't work at particular junctures, and we've decided to change things. And, I work in law. There's countless examples of where the constraints that municipalities have reached this pivotal point where leaders were able to step up and say, we need something new. We need a new piece of provincial legislation. We need a new way of collaborating, because if we don't, we're not going to harness the community needs that we have. We need strong cities. We need strong downtowns.
I mean, that's certainly what we've been about for 48 hours, is trying to hammer that home, that the country won't work if we don't have if we don't invest in, my little phrase, it's not mine, but Mayor Daley's phrase, that an apple rots from the core. Lanrick, you're in an advocacy position. I mean, you advocate for all sorts of things, but your particular day job is something that has municipal jurisdiction, but I feel like the benefits of your advocacy actually talk to the things that the chief is speaking about, that it has a health benefit and it has an environmental benefit and it has an economic benefit. Do you have a thought about this as we've been listening to the last couple of days? I know you were on yesterday quite a bit. Do you have a sense of whether we can glean from that some commitment to this sort of holistic, integrated approach?
And for sure, that holistic piece needs to gain steam. It needs that political will. There is so much energy in so many different facets of how our cities work. There's a lack of communication between all of those different silos, and trying to get those different entities together to sit down to explain what their issues are, what their problems are, and finding solutions together. That's where the power, that's where the magic of the city is going to come from.
How do we do it? How do we do it? I mean, you've done it. You've done it. I mean, when you've done it, how have you done it?
So the way that we do it is you start to take down all of those barriers. You start to take down all of the angst of being able to just be human. And I know right now we're all about the Zoom and we're all about the Teams, but this type of communication is exactly what we need to be doing. Not doing it in a silo, not doing it in a corner, not coming, hey, this is exactly what we need to do. It is really wanting to talk with your community, with your community leaders, with your politicians, regardless what level of government they are. You're coming together to want to move forward. It's not fine enough. You can take a look at what happened in the past, but we're living right now, and we've got hopefully a game plan to go forward. But that's got to be put together as a team, as opposed to trying to do this again as those siloed pieces. It's not going to work that way.
It's interesting. I just see whether or not, I mean, we've been in this crisis. We've been in a crisis for 2 years, and I know lots of us are anxious that when the crisis is over, we'll just sort of slump back into doing it the way we've always done it. And yet,
let me just say one last thing there. It's when we talk about the build back better, when you're using that hashtag, we don't want to go back to normal. No. We want to be moving ourselves forward. It has to be. These 2 years, if nothing else, has taught us so many of those gaps that are within our cities, within the country in general. This is our time to shine, and we can't miss this opportunity.
Well, the one good thing about the last couple of days is that we've had different sectors on these calls, I've got to say. And one of them was, universities. And we had just had a couple of university presidents. Annika, I saw you in the chat. I know you were listening when President Johnson and President Lekemi were speaking. A thought that both you and Alex might have about, this is something that I feel quite personally at CUI. I feel like we've got a lot of people doing smart research in universities that nobody actually knows about, that we have to try to find a way to surface all the things that you and your colleagues are doing and then connect them up into the policy leadership world. And that's part of what your center is about. And I know it's part of what Alex is doing and all the things that she sits on. Do you want to comment a bit about that, about where you, and also, I guess, the university in its role as a placemaker and as a city builder, because you're all somewhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. That was a great session. And I really liked that it was the culmination of a lot of other conversations that had brought in higher ed, as you mentioned.
Yeah, they all mentioned it. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't just the president saying, what about us? It was a whole bunch of people saying, what about the universities?
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. As anchor institution, we heard that all the way through. And I think, on the research piece, absolutely. I don't know if there's anyone here from the funding agencies, but I know that's a conversation that's kind of been happening in the chat over the last couple of days too, is thinking about how we fund research and how we fund city-focused research. I think there have been some good examples of that in the last couple of years, including CIHR's Healthy Cities initiatives that have had a few different pieces there. So I think that's there. I think there is definitely room for much better collaboration amongst universities, amongst researchers. And I know there's been talk at CUI in terms of potentially still a dearth of those of us doing work, city level research across the country. So I think building that up. I think we have a role as well in the community, right? That community facing piece and how we leverage the expertise of the community is a really key place for us as well. And how visible we are in our own communities as well in terms of the research that we do, right? Is a key piece, is being seen as not ivory tower, but really having an important role to play in terms of moving the whole community along. And that can be a politicized space as well, right? It's tricky as researchers to navigate some of that, but I think it's incredibly important. And maybe the last thing I would just add is, I think, which I don't think has been talked about so much over the last few days, is we are also producers of a new layer of expertise on city building, right? If you want lawyers to know what city governance is, then you need us doing municipal governance in law schools. If you want urban planners who sort of understand the broad landscape, you need that. You need it across every department, in every faculty. We need the engineers, and we need to all be working together. So I think there's an incredible potential there still.
My colleague Jamie is here from Springboard Policy, and they've been tracking over the last couple of days to start to help, and they're going to now help us at CUI kind of figure out what the sort of roadmap looks like going forward. Jamie, I think you've got a few slides that you might want to throw up. Do you want to share those up?
Yesterday, my colleague Noah was on, and we shared some themes sort of from the first day that we really picked up, and so our team was listening to all the sessions over today, and we wanted to share our thinking on some of the themes that really popped out to us coming from the day. Can you see that? All right. So we sort of framed our summary through the idea of 3 challenges that we heard loud and clear throughout the day, 3 solutions, and sort of 1 call to action. And what we really heard is, I think, a backbone issue that's really come across, maybe not foreground in the way that we've talked about every single issue, but affordability is a challenge that is going to have to be tackled as we deal with any of the issues. Businesses aren't going to be able to, if businesses can't afford to start up, they're not going to be, local business owners aren't going to come back to the spaces they once occupied. If people can't afford to live in a downtown area, they're going to leave and go elsewhere. The artists live where they can afford to pay rent. Integrated services can be offered. Nonprofits need to be able to afford space to be able to offer the types of services that are needed in order to deal with mental health and addictions. Downtowns as safe and inclusive places, that was something Nolan Marshall said in the previous panel, but Chief Dale Mcphee has covered in depth even in his conversation. And something that really came out in the first panel, in some of the early panels, is like, what does 3 days a week look like for downtowns? Sort of challenging, if people don't, this is a human question and it's out there and it's a challenge that's going to need to be addressed just by human nature. But what are the knock-on effects of that? Is spending going to be less? What decisions will people make about where and when to reopen businesses in an environment where the traffic flows are not as predictable as they were? 3 solutions. The one that came across very strongly across all days was that we've heard so many ways that spaces could potentially be adapted and reimagined to
this idea of adaptive reuse. How do we repurpose churches, repurpose buildings, repurpose streets, repurpose vacant space? You're right. It was repeated again and again and again.
And the other thing, we saw some really great and inspiring examples of city-led strategies partnering in really creative and nimble ways to tackle sort of economic shocks. And how do we continue to enable those strategies so that not only that they're funded, not just emergency funding, but continuing over the long term?
Well, and also they coined the phrase, just for the benefit of people who didn't hear it, they were saying that the city is the enabler. City government is the enabler. They were positioning city government as the enabler of, and then let other people, and didn't Tom Mahler from Calgary say, and then we just have to get out of the way. A lot of people went, oh, what an encouraging thing for a municipal bureaucrat to say, get out of the way. Keep going there, Jamie.
And so how can we carry this spirit of finding ways to collaborate and finding ways to deliver integrated services in ways that continue on in the future? And so I think our final call to action for this is, how do we build an action plan for downtown recovery that's going to be enabled and vibrant across cities across the country?
Well, that's the deal. That's what we have to do now. And I mean, we had 1,300 registrants for this, and people coming on and off, several hundred each time at any one session. And I always say that for the numbers of people that register, there's 3 times those who didn't register, but write me to tell me they know it's happening. So there's something about gaining momentum, I would say, around this unit of a focus, that we need to look at the local unit of focus, and that maybe that's one of the horrible silver linings, or the silver linings of a horrible tragedy, is that it's refocused all of us on our community and on what's immediately adjacent to us. It's going to be interesting, eh? Dale, do you think about this as we re-enter? Are chiefs of police sort of bracing themselves for what is this? Do you think we're going to figure out again how to live with each other when we're actually back out in circulation?
Well, we have to, but it's not going to be without some growing pains. And I think what we can actually take note of right now is some of the turmoil that's going on in some of our friends in the South, in the American cities, and how they're trying to change their path. And I think what we want to do, though, is blue sky this and have the plan before we hit the crisis. We're in a crisis now, but let's not wait another several months before it becomes more of a crisis, because as long as we wait, the harder it is to do. And as both Jamie and Alex and Annika have said, as well as Leonard, we have the ability to reverse engineer this. Like, this is not something that has to be more any complicated than that. And if we focus on 20% success and get some momentum and get some of the belief and the confidence back in that business sector and other things, that there's changes afoot, it will multiply and bring people in there. If we think we're going to build the perfect system and then implement it, it'll be too late. So this is like building the airplane in the air. And if we don't get the right people in the room, and as Landrick said, this is a consortium of the willing, at the end of the day, is put our titles behind and let's get at it, because the time is of the essence.
I'm trying to think of a time in my working life anyway, where I would have heard the business community and government and the civil society, all of us talking about very similar things. I don't know, did anybody else think? None of you is as old as me, but I'm just thinking that, to hear business people talking about mental health, and to hear them talking about transit, and then to hear culture people talking about real estate, like the fact that we've got this moment of uber focus on specific elements of the way in which we construct our collective life together. We don't want to waste an opportunity. That was said several times. We'll need to have some momentum. I also think we're going to need to have some kindness and some encouragement to one another, because I think people have gone through a lot, and they're still going to feel the effects of that. And we're fortunate that we have really great places that can restore us and remind us of the value of living in community as we do. So I just want to thank everybody. Jamie, thank you for stepping in from Springboard. Alex, always great to see you. I know that we're going to have a constitutional revolution. I know you're not giving up on that, but I also appreciate that you're suggesting we can start somewhere, right? Doesn't have to be perfect at the beginning.
No. In fact, I think trying to, just as Chief Dale Mcphee said, if we focus on perfection, we're not going to get anywhere. In fact, one of the beautiful things about the pandemic was the emphasis on pilot projects, bike lanes, public space, et cetera, all the things that have been spoken about. They weren't suggested to be there forever. Many have stayed, which is great. But let's think about pilot governance. What does that look like? We don't have to, law is small L, right? We don't have to have. Oh
my God, did you hear that, everybody? A lawyer just said that. Just saying. Yeah.
Yeah. It's about
pilot governance. I love that. Annika, what do you think? You're at a law school.
Completely agree. Pilot governance, build on relationships. Absolutely. Start with what we've got, try it, and it'll stick.
Last word to you, Lanrick.
Oh man.
I'm
gonna throw this at you. I used to be an actor, producer with the Second City. It's all about improv. We have this saying about yes and all I see is the ability for us to yes and each other and want to go forward. The story doesn't end. The story continues. You have to say yes and you've got to keep going forward.
No better way to finish than with yes and. So thanks everybody. Dale, nice to see you again. Thanks Alex and Annika and Jamie and Landrick, always my neighbor, for joining us. And I just want to thank all my colleagues at CUI, including Jamie and Deneva, who are the producers of this, who've been in the background. We all know, anybody on the program knows they're the ones chasing links and making sure that people's cameras work. And I think we had 60 speakers or 60 participants. And then, as I said, we had 1,300 people signing up in and out. And then we had 55 sponsors, I think, some of whom provided cold hard cash and some who provided content, and many, many, many partners. And as you've all been saying, it needs to be all of us together in this, and we're going to all be together in it for a while yet. So thanks everybody for joining us. The Summit on the City, the Recovering Downtowns. Let's get busy. The work begins now. Thanks everybody.
Thanks Mary.